Anthony Albanese is watching something unfold that scares him more than any policy failure, more than any poll slide, more than any internal revolt. Australians are openly calling for Pauline Hanson to be Prime Minister. Not as a joke, not as irony, not as a protest whispered in private group chats, as a serious, vocal demand. And that alone tells you something has gone very wrong. Because this moment is not about Pauline Hanson. It's about what happens when people completely lose faith in the political system they're told is working for them. When trust collapses, when patience snaps, when the centre gives way, voters don't look for perfection, they look for defiance. If you feel politically homeless right now, if you feel like neither major party speaks for you anymore, this video is about your frustration. And before we go any further, do one thing for me. If you've ever felt ignored by the political class, tap like now. Not for the algorithm, for proof that this feeling is real. Because what you're about to hear isn't sanitized, isn't filtered through party loyalty, and isn't designed to protect anyone in power. This channel exists to ask the questions the establishment avoids. So subscribe and turn on notifications if you're tired of coverage that treats voters like children and politicians like royalty. Now let's get into why this demand for Pauline Hanson as Prime Minister is not noise. It's a warning flare the system cannot afford to ignore. For years, anytime Pauline Hanson's name popped up, it came with a laugh track, eye rolls, dismissal, the assumption that no serious person could possibly support her beyond protest voting. That assumption is now dangerously outdated. What's happening right now feels different because it is different. The calls for Hanson aren't coming from fringe message boards or anonymous troll accounts. They're coming from ordinary Australians, small business owners watching margins evaporate, parents staring down impossible rent increases, retirees realising their savings don't stretch anymore. People who used to vote Labor or Liberal without thinking twice, now openly saying, "At least she says what we're thinking." And that sentence should terrify the major parties, because when voters stop laughing and start nodding, something has shifted. This isn't irony culture. This isn't shock value. This is frustration turning into resolve. Scroll through social media and you'll see it everywhere. Short videos, long posts, comments that don't read like jokes, but like confessions. People admitting they no longer trust anyone in Canberra. People saying they feel abandoned. People saying the system feels rigged, unresponsive, and arrogant. And here's the part the media keeps skipping over. These aren't people saying Pauline Hanson has all the answers. They're saying she's the only one willing to ask the questions they never hear answered. That distinction matters. Before we go further, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, city, suburb, or regional, because the geography of this anger explains more than any poll ever could. And as this sentiment grows louder, one thing becomes impossible to deny. This moment didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built, ignored, dismissed, and allowed to harden. But that wasn't the whole story. Because the real question isn't why people are talking about Pauline Hanson, it's why they've stopped believing in everyone else. Let's clear something up, because this is where most coverage completely misses the point. Australians are not suddenly demanding Pauline Hanson as Prime Minister because they've read One Nation's policy platform and decided it's flawless. That's not what's happening. This moment isn't policy-driven. It's emotional. It's symbolic. Hanson represents something the major parties abandoned a long time ago. Unfiltered speech, defiance, a refusal to soften language to please focus groups or corporate donors. Whether people agree with her or not, they believe she's saying what she actually thinks. And in a climate where trust is dead, authenticity beats expertise every time. That's the uncomfortable truth no one in Canberra wants to say out loud. For years, voters have watched politicians speak in perfectly engineered sentences that somehow say nothing. Every answer wrapped in disclaimers, every position watered down to avoid offence, every interview designed to offend no one and convince even fewer. And people noticed. So when someone like Hanson speaks without apology, without polish, without the usual political filter, it cuts through. Not because it's elegant, but because it feels real. And here's the twist. Even Australians who strongly disagree with her policies are admitting something uncomfortable. They trust that she believes what she says. They trust that she's not reading from a script written by consultants who've never worried about rent, power bills, or grocery prices. That's why this moment is dangerous for the establishment, because once voters start rewarding bluntness over competence, the old rules stop working. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you heard a major party leader speak plainly about your life without sounding like they were selling something? If that question stings, you're not alone. Say "feels staged" in the comments if you know exactly what I mean. And as this hunger for authenticity grows, it exposes a much deeper problem. The people running the country have mistaken politeness for leadership. And that brings us straight to Labor's biggest miscalculation. Labor's entire governing philosophy has been built around one idea: be the safe choice. Be the adults in the room. Avoid unnecessary conflict. Project calm. Project stability. That strategy works when people feel secure. It collapses when they don't. Right now, millions of Australians don't feel safe. They feel squeezed. They feel anxious. They feel like every month costs more while their future delivers less. And in moments like that, caution doesn't feel reassuring. It feels weak. Anthony Albanese has spent his time in office trying not to rock the boat, avoiding sharp edges, offering gentle language and vague reassurances, promising that things are tough but manageable, that help is coming, that patience is required. But here's the problem. When people are struggling, patience sounds like indifference. Labor assumed voters wanted calm governance at any cost. What they missed is that calm without results feels like abandonment. When bills keep rising, rents keep climbing, and housing feels permanently out of reach, platitudes land like insults. This is where the trust fracture deepens, because every time Labor avoids a hard fight, voters interpret it as surrender. Every time Albanese sidesteps confrontation, people see a leader more concerned with optics than outcomes. And once that perception sets in, it's almost impossible to reverse. If you've ever heard a government message and thought, "That sounds nice, but it doesn't change my reality," type "not working" below. That disconnect is exactly what's driving this moment. And here's the brutal truth. Labor didn't lose voters to Pauline Hanson because Hanson outperformed them. They lost them because Labor stopped sounding like it was on their side. And once that happens, anger doesn't disappear. It looks for somewhere to go. Next, we're going to talk about the promises that accelerated this collapse, the ones voters remember every time they open a bill, check their rent, or look at the housing market and realise the system isn't built for them anymore. Every government survives on trust, and trust isn't built on speeches, it's built on follow-through. This is where Labor's problem becomes impossible to spin. Anthony Albanese didn't campaign on radical transformation, he promised relief, stability, a government that would make life feel easier, not heavier. But for millions of Australians, the opposite happened. Cost of living was supposed to ease. Instead, grocery bills stretch thinner every week. Power bills keep climbing. Insurance, fuel, childcare, essentials, all moving in the wrong direction. And every time people hear another calm assurance from Canberra, it feels further removed from reality. Housing was supposed to become more affordable. Instead, rents are hitting record highs. First home buyers feel permanently locked out. Entire generations are realising the Australian dream now comes with an asterisk they can't afford to erase. Integrity was supposed to be restored. Transparency was meant to be the point of difference. Yet controversy after controversy chipped away at that promise. Decisions that felt unexplained, processes that felt closed, moments that made voters ask, is this really different or just dressed better? Here's the psychological damage this does. When expectations are low, disappointment is manageable. When expectations are raised and then unmet, disappointment turns into betrayal. That's the shift happening right now. People aren't just unhappy, they feel misled. And once that emotion takes hold, facts stop mattering as much as feelings. Statistics don't comfort someone who feels played. Explanations don't calm someone who feels ignored. If you've ever looked at your bills and thought, this government has no idea what my life actually costs, drop a "they don't get it" in the comments. That moment of realization is when trust snaps. And when trust snaps, voters don't move gently, they swing hard. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable truth of all. This surge towards figures like Pauline Hanson isn't a sign of madness, it's a sign of desperation. When people start demanding fringe figures as Prime Minister, it's not because they've lost their minds, it's because they've lost hope that the system works for them. History is clear on this. Every time a political system stops responding to ordinary people, voters look for disruption, not perfection, not balance, disruption. They want someone who will break things, someone who will challenge norms, someone who feels like a threat to the people who've been ignoring them. And Pauline Hanson fits that role whether the establishment likes it or not. Her appeal in this moment has nothing to do with detailed policy plans. It's emotional, it's defiant, it's a middle finger to a political class that keeps telling struggling Australians to be patient while their lives get harder. That's why dismissing her supporters as ignorant or extreme is such a catastrophic mistake. Every insult reinforces the idea that the system despises them. Every lecture convinces them they're right to reject it. And here's the paradox no one wants to admit. The more the establishment panics, the stronger the populist appeal becomes. Suppression doesn't kill resentment, it feeds it. If you've ever felt talked down to by politicians or commentators who don't live your reality, type "had enough" below. That feeling is the fuel driving this shift. This is also where Labor made another error. They assumed voters would always choose stability over chaos. But when stability feels like stagnation, chaos starts looking like action. And once that mental switch flips, it doesn't flip back easily. Now, zoom out for a moment, because this isn't just an Australian story. What's happening here fits a pattern playing out across the world. And when you see that pattern clearly, the danger for Labor becomes even more obvious. If this felt isolated, if it felt uniquely Australian, it would be easier for the major parties to dismiss. But it isn't, and that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Across the Western world, the same story keeps repeating. Long-standing political parties lose touch with everyday life. They speak in abstractions, while voters live in consequences. They prioritise process over outcomes, and slowly, almost invisibly at first, trust evaporates. When that trust disappears, voters don't drift gently, they revolt. We've seen it again and again. Outsiders rise not because they're perfect, but because they're disruptive, because they reject elite language, because they speak in a way that sounds like the kitchen table, not the boardroom. These movements don't start as policy revolutions, they start as emotional ones, a collective decision that the old rules no longer deserve obedience. Australia is not immune to that dynamic. We just delayed it longer than most. Strong institutions, compulsory voting, a sense of stability, all of it masked the underlying resentment. But pressure doesn't vanish, it builds. And now the cracks are visible. Pauline Hanson isn't creating this wave, she's riding it. She's a vessel for something much larger, a rejection of a political class that feels distant, insulated, and increasingly irrelevant. That's why trying to fact-check this moment into submission won't work. This isn't about accuracy, it's about legitimacy. And once legitimacy is questioned, authority starts to crumble. If you're seeing this pattern and realising Australia isn't as exceptional as we like to believe, type "same story" in the comments, because recognising the pattern is the first step to understanding what comes next. And what comes next is the part that should keep Labor strategists awake at night.